Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Lounge for 2025. Today I have my guest, Mark Walsh, who is also known as Mr. Embodiment. Known as the Embodiment Legend, he is the author of The Body and Coaching and Training, an introduction to embodied facilitation and embodied meditation. He also hosts the Embodied podcast and led the Embodiment Conference, and recently has come up with feral psychology and released a new book for young men. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Pleasure. It's always a bit embarrassing as a Brit to be described as a legend, but I'll take it.
I'm pretty sure I got that from your own marketing materials. So
it's maybe my PA taking the piss.
Most likely. Well, it is something that we connected over several years ago. We connected when I was still living in Hong Kong, and since then you've done even more. I particularly love how you go into the corporate environment and they make you wear a suit, so you charge them more.
Absolutely. I used to do a lot of work in business. I mean, I started off as kind of a hippie, and then I was doing a lot of stuff in martial arts, which builds a lot of the skills I use now as a live-in martial arts student. And at a certain point, I was doing NGO work in war zones, areas of conflict. You know, I do that in the Ukraine to some extent still. But I kind of went, hang on a minute, I want to earn a living. Who has money? Business. And bought a suit and made a lot of mistakes, but sort of learned the hard way how to frame some of my work, and actually learned a lot from those environments and working internationally in business. So yeah, it's been quite a ride.
Yes, absolutely. And so do you still work a lot in the business sphere, or has that shifted a little bit?
I mostly train coaches now because I've become a specialist in this area called embodiment, it just means working with the body in a non-athletic way. So we're using the body to help with people's emotional intelligence, leadership, charisma, stress management, resilience, different areas like that. And because I've become a kind of specialist in that, I now train other coaches. So I'm teaching the Norwegian International Coach Federation tomorrow and the Association for Coaching the next day. I still do a little bit of business work, and as I said, and work with a charity in Ukraine that I founded, and just for fun, occasionally take young guys to the gym and do a little bit of work with young guys who aren't flourishing so well, and help them do a little bit better.
That's awesome. Yes, most of the world, as we were talking before we went live, lives up here, and we're a bunch of walking, talking heads. So what was your journey into the embodiment work? You said you were a bit of a hippie and that's how you started. Was this something that was always natural to you, of being more in the body than in the mind?
No, I mean, my story is pretty equivalent to that of, we could say, Western civilizations, which is the primacy of the cognitive. The people have heard of Descartes, I'm sure, body-mind split, the idea that what matters is mind. And this started with some of the Greeks and really took off after the industrialization, the idea that what mattered was thinking. So I was very academic at school, actually, and I was from a family of teachers. And I made the mistake in thinking that learning about things is the same as learning things. And that is sort of the mistake of our entire educational system and culture and business world. Business people who have done they may have an MBA from Harvard or from, say, business school in Oxford or whatever, but they still don't have it. They still don't have any wisdom, and they don't necessarily have even the leadership skills. So my story was, I was super cognitive. That didn't work out very well for me. I ended up alcoholic, suicidal, miserable as a young man. And then thought, well, what else is there? So when I went to university to study psychology, I thought, all the answers aren't in the library, clearly, because I read the library at my high school, and that didn't help. Literally, I read the library. And I walked into a martial arts school, because also I was living in kind of a rough area, kind of in the ghetto and in a big city. And I thought, you know what, let's learn some martial arts. But that was an absolute saving grace for me. And the Japanese have this idea of Aikido or Karate Do. It's character development, essentially, which used to be an idea in the West. All the sort of sports that we play today are based on that idea. They're originally developed from this kind of Greco-Roman character development concept. The Japanese still have it, Koreans too, other nations in the East, and really dived into that and just found myself learning so much about myself through Aikido that I wasn't learning in my academic psychology studies. That became my passion. And then from Aikido, it extended into all the other areas of what I would now call embodiment. So that's things like yoga, meditation, conscious dance, body therapy, improv. The umbrella term for all of these arts that involve the body as more than a piece of meat, more than a brain taxi, as a key aspect of who we are. Just embodiment. It is basically a type of intelligence. Maybe listeners have heard of emotional intelligence. Well, emotional intelligence is effectively a subset of embodied intelligence. It's like empathy is embodied, the ability to inspire, to make people laugh, to be charismatic. These are all embodied capacities. Self-regulation, key one in a business environment. So that's become my specialism basically, and it's taken me around the world. So it's not been a bad life.
Yeah, that's amazing. I do appreciate the character development with martial arts, because there's a discipline that comes with it. And it is very much that, Mr. Miyagi, you think it's completely unrelated. Why am I doing this thing? This is pointless. And then later you realize, how valuable that is. And that's what's happening with a lot of people now. And I think that's the reason why we have such high levels of anxiety and stress than ever before, because people are not in their bodies. They're constantly, as you said, using the body as a brain taxi. I really like that term. I don't like that it's what happens, but I think that's a great term to get people to understand what's happening.
Head on a stick would be another one. So we're effectively missing our humanity, and there's a few levels to that. So, I mean, sometimes it's trauma, that can numb the body. For other people, it's just spending the speed of modernity. And this is essentially a problem of modernity, right? Without idealizing the past, we're living at a pace and almost a brutality. Like everyone I know in business is busier than they were, and they were busy. There's a speed and a pace and brutality to things now. The tech is another side of things, that we're often in that online world, which is a very cerebral, cognitive world, rather than in our bodies. And there's other aspects, the loss of community, the loss of meaning, I'm very interested in, because this kind of, if you imagine that we're embodied, but we're embodied in community and in ecology and in place. So essentially we're dysregulated because we've lost self-regulation, but we've also lost co-regulation. It's like the village, the supportive community, right? If I'm a busy mother, businesswoman, she's not got the support she would have had in traditional cultures. Ecology, we're not eco-regulated. We're working in glass and concrete buildings. I remember working with a major management consultancy people will have heard of in Moscow before the war, and their entire building had no plants in it. It was all just like chrome edges and sharp. And I just went in there and I just felt like, oh my God, how do you function in here? So the environment is one, and then meaning is a big one. That most people today, their lives lack meaning. They lack any purpose or sense of direction, and that is catastrophic for human flourishing.
What do you think is the driver behind that loss of meaning?
Well, I mean, it's been, Nietzsche identified it really over 100 years ago. So, I mean, it's been around a while. He said, God is dead and we have killed him. What he meant by that is we'd lost the sense of divine, of spirit, the magic of life, the disenchantment of life, it's been called. We no longer believe in the religions of our fathers and mothers, grandparents. Generally, there are some people who do, but it's rare. I've got a Muslim cousin and stuff, but not very many, Generally now we've lost that sense. We've lost our animist connection to ecology. So most of our ancestors were Paleolithic animist, just evolutionary wise. That's what we're wired for. And the loss of the village, the loss of tribe, the loss of tradition. This is a kind of conservative point of view. This is that we've actually lost the traditional structures of meaning and coherence that existed in Europe, for example, 100 years ago. If you think of like Hobbiton, it's essentially a British village from 100 years ago, and and that doesn't exist anymore. And if you add to that the technology, which is really a technology of addiction and mind destruction. We've let crack dealers into our house, and they're called Facebook and Apple. So those crack dealers aren't doing us any good.
Yes, I was just having this conversation the other day where we're more connected than ever before. I mean, we're doing this podcast in different countries, and we're able to stream live, and yet most of us are more lonely than before because it's this cheap dopamine fix that we're getting through the endless mindless scrolling, and all of those algorithms are designed to keep us hooked onto that.
That's their job. That's their business model.
Exactly.
I mean, I had Anna Lemke from Dopamine Notion on my podcast, fantastic, from Stanford. And, she's absolutely aligned with this in terms of the issues around the addictification of technology. Sometimes it's called limbic capitalism. It's I'm not against business. I worked in business. I run a business, I employ people. But the idea of sort of your business model being reliant upon addiction, as most food is, as most entertainment is now, that's quite different than in the past, like quantitatively, if not qualitatively. And then, the destruction of community. Without co-regulation, we go nuts. Like we're not meant to be lonely consumers on our own. So like disembodiment is one thing, but if you imagine it's the lack of self-regulation, co-regulation, eco-regulation, and what we could call theo-regulation, meaning like meaning, purpose, spirit, but that's all related. So those four disconnections is sort of central model I work with, whether I'm training business people how to be better leaders and work with those, or Ukrainians with trauma or kids with mental health problems. It's all the same.
So what would you say is, for somebody who's listening, what is something that they can do to get started? Where would you
start? Yeah. I mean, we run a course every year for coaches, and we layer it. So we start off with just 5 times a day, your alarm goes off. Like you've got that app you were showing me where you just like check in with your body, 30 seconds, 5 times a day. It's 2.5 minutes a day. If you tell me you can't afford 2.5 minutes, I'll say you're a liar, right? But that's a simple thing. If you can do 10 minutes of meditation in the morning, great. Get outside as much as possible. Like I do all my coaching calls walking in the fields near my house. I'm very lucky. I moved to the edge of a small town, so I could do my coaching outside 2-3 hours a day. Yeah, basic practices, some kind of movement practice, some kind of gentle movement practice. And if you fall in love with a practice, I know all sorts of quite conventional people who fall in love with martial arts, yoga, tango, conscious dance. Brilliant. Like if you can find something you love, and then you don't have to do it as a chore. And these are what we can do on the individual level, but then, we do need to be looking more profoundly than this, I would say, at a collective level.
So when we start looking at the collective level, because a lot of people, it's no longer as taboo as it used to be. I mean, you used the word yoga before, like 20 years ago, people were like,
oh, my life's got so much easier. When I first went into business, I got business 20 years ago, I'd say, who's meditated? And people would look at me like I was the weirdest hippie. Right. Now they think, oh, I've got the Headspace app and my wife's a yoga teacher. And like, it's so normal now. Like my life has got, like in business, it's so much easier now.
So this is now more mainstream, particularly in the West. I think from my perspective, what I've seen is this is less of an issue in a lot of Eastern cultures because they still have more of the community, the collective. Yeah.
Southern Europe, more community too. Eastern Europe's got some different factors, though more trauma. I've taught in 40 or 50 countries, and there are cultural differences around some of this stuff. But it is essentially a global phenomenon of modernity. Like Korea has the same population crisis that we have and you have.
Yeah.
Like, it's essentially a problem of modernity.
So let's take a look at America, because America is extremely hyper individualistic. There's a lot of things that have contributed to that. There is a huge lack of community. And I mean, there's even people will live in apartment buildings, not know who their neighbors are. There's, I remember growing up and knowing my neighbors down the street, playing with the kids in the cul-de-sac, and that doesn't really exist anymore. So for people who might live in an area that is like that, how do you recommend they go about finding and building their own community?
Leave America. No, I mean, I love the States because it's really can do. I have American mentors, American Jewish mentors have been particularly helpful to me. And I love the can do. I was just in Austin and it's such a great can do kind of vibe. I like that positive energy there. But it tends to be a bit more objectifying and less relational. The sense I get in the States is I'm always being sold to. Like Kant said, that treating people as the philosopher Immanuel Kant talks about treating people as means to ends rather than ends in themselves, and how that wasn't great. I really get that feeling in America. Yeah. I think you've got a couple of many problems. Like one is you have you don't have a coherence. I mean, you're a country founded on an idea which is already different than any other nation. Like the Japanese are not an idea; they're a group, they're ethno-linguistic group. Right. And secondly, no one believes in that idea anymore. So young people have been educated to hate themselves, which is a real problem. They hate their country, and that's a real problem. So I think that's the case in Europe, but worse there. Another one is ugliness. Like I was just in Italy. It's beautiful. People come from all over the world to visit Italy. And I'm sorry, but most of America, the countryside's beautiful, like Grand Canyon and stuff, great, the Rockies, but the cities look like parking lots. Yeah. And aesthetics is really important to the human spirit. So that would be another relevant factor. I would say, though, whatever conditions you're in, you can, and it's not not everyone can get up and move. You know, Britain's in a state of absolute decline right now, and luckily I have an Irish passport, so I'm not post Brexit. I can move to Slovenia. It's fine. That's my favorite place in Europe.
Yeah.
So and certainly some places are better than others, and if you can move, you may want to consider it. That's the first thing I'd say. But you can also talk to your neighbors. Like, I make an effort to stop and talk to my neighbors. Like, I just talked to one outside now, or getting coffee with my girlfriend. Spend that time talking to them. You can invite, like, we do a community dance here that we go to once a week. You know, if I do move to Slovenia, my plan is to start in a kids Aikido club and just get to know the parents, right? Like, I'm not against the tech in all ways. So, for example, I have a really good online men's group. And we're a group of business people who talk about our businesses. We share staff members. We give advice on emails and marketing. And like, that's a solid men's group, but we have a very particular interest. It's business within a particular subset of my field. So you can form, have an online philosophy discussion group that I meet once a week. So I think these things can be used skillfully, but you need to be a bit careful around them, because you can't replace real face-to-face community like they have in Spain and Italy. Old people eating ice creams in the town square, like that kind of co-regulation. Like, you can't replace that with Facebook.
No, absolutely not. It really does take just a little bit of effort, but there's often this barrier where people are shy, or they don't want to bother somebody. And I think a lot of that is due to it wasn't modeled for them.
Sure, it's a skill. And the
Right.
kids are losing that skill, like approach skills, like being able to talk to strangers. I chat to people. I'm fucking Irish family, it's no problem for me. But it's like, I just chatted to the girl in the cafe. I was saying, who's the happiest age group? I like to sort of gather research on psychology just informally that way. It's always young people, by the way, the least happy. And it's really sad. But it's like, I just talk to people every day. My mum used to do that because she's Irish, and it's just embarrassing when I was a kid. But that is a skill set, right? And then, when I started finding girls interesting, I was like, okay, now I've got a motivation to learn this skill set. So it's it's just a shame to lose those skills.
And so, aside from just getting the reps in, what is a way that people can improve those skills?
Give less of a shit. Most people, like, I just wrote a book on people pleasing because it's a topic that came up with a lot of my students.
Yes.
And most people care way too much what people think. Way too much. Luckily I had an alcoholic dad, so I kind of stopped caring what other people think, in the little village I grew up in the countryside. For American listeners, I pretty much come from like the Alabama of England. Sort of rural, but hard drugs and cousin marriages where I'm from. So that's why I'm a little bit more down to earth with this stuff, maybe, than the average kind of embodiment teacher. But give less of a shit. Excuse my language. And
you're allowed to swear on this podcast.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yes.
It's my cultural right. And do the reps, as you say. Centering helps, which is a self-regulation practice I teach, because essentially it's it's a bit nerve-wracking, whether it's a 19-year-old asking a girl out and trying, whether it's talking to a stranger while on holiday or practicing your French or whatever. Like, it's stressful, right? So self-regulation techniques are helpful there. And definitely travel. Like, I've done a lot of travel, and you're sort of forced to go, where's the train station? I don't know. And even with all the apps and everything else, you still end up in more conversations. So that'd be a last tip if you can.
Yeah, that's perfect. Now, with people pleasing, there's a lot of people who self-identify and know that they have this tendency, or they're like, I say I'm a recovering people pleaser. And so I sometimes will catch myself falling back into an old pattern, and I have built awareness and, worked on that. But there's also a lot of people who would not say that they're a people pleaser. And if you were to ever even bring up that term, they'd be like, I don't care what people think. When in reality, they do.
They really do.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. If anyone's ever tried to cancel you, I've had that in the past. There's some cancel culture stuff, and it's pretty uncomfortable, even if you think you don't care, because we are animals that are very sensitive to shame and the opinions of the tribe. We're social animals. Yeah. So unless you're like very, very autistic or psychopathic or something very neuroatypical, you do care. We all care. I would say the self-identification thing is kind of popular right now. Everyone's self-identifying as traumatized and ADHD, which, and people, all these things. It's a little bit ridiculous. It's just the way to be special sometimes, I think. It's a little bit oversensitive. And some people need to be more people pleasers. Like the hyper-individualism of America you were talking about.
Yes.
Well, if my Italian or Spanish students are people pleasers because they're very communal cultures, and they probably give a little bit too much than they should. there's little indicators, like you find yourself saying yes when you mean no, and then you resent it afterwards. So that would be an indicator, right? But for example, like the Spanish, for example, do that a lot, culturally, some of the Asian groups. But I mean, a lot of my friends in England, America, they need to be more people pleasers. They actually need to learn how to be communal and not be like, well, I'm the boss of me as this lone consumer unit, this hyper lonely, sad, narcissistic, hyper individual. Like, that's probably not the best thing. I mean, happiness comes from service. Like, this is the truth of every spiritual tradition and all the positive psychology research. Your happiness depends on the quality of your relationships and the quality of just giving. Like, if I remember I went for a period where I was really traumatized from Ukraine. I was quite down. I was quite burnt out. But whenever I taught, I felt fine because I wasn't focusing on myself.
Yes.
Right. I'd crawl out of bed, teach a blinding workshop online, and then go back to bed, because it's like that focus away from yourself and just going, how can I be of service? How can I be generous? Like, this is like the classic practice of Buddhism, by the way. It's not meditation. That's secondary. It's dana, which means giving. That's the primary practice of Buddhism. So, the sort of consumer unit of yoga that you buy in New York or London, like that's missing the point of actual human flourishing.
I feel that a lot of the westernized version of yoga is more focused on athletics, or what I call spiritual bypassing. So it's, I do yoga and I'm a vegan. So therefore I'm really up on a high horse and I'm better than you.
Using the spiritual yoga voice of moral superiority.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's all things out there, right? And sometimes I feel like it's good because it just gets people doing anything. And a little bit of stretching is good for you. But if you're just doing physical practice, you're not doing yoga, you're doing bad gymnastics, right? Like, like if being flexible made you enlightened, then Chinese gymnasts would all be enlightened, right? So it's like, stretching is great, but limited. It's not very good strength training. I'd rather go to the gym for strength training.
Absolutely.
But it's better than nothing for exercise, and good luck to people. It can have a very narcissistic quality, and as you say, the bypassing of the real human stuff is not in the spiritual domain. It's in the messy humanness of business and relationships and family and all that good stuff.
I mean, everything is about relationships. It's how we relate to people, whether that's a romantic relationship, a business relationship, a friendship. It's how we relate to the things around us, objects, ideas, places, things. And so it's actually very important that we are in relationships so that we can work through things, learn about ourselves. When we isolate, isolation is the worst advisor. And yet that's what so many people do. And I think we saw that during COVID. You and I had a few conversations around that through that time.
Yeah, I mean, a relationship with one's body rather than using one's body as an object is a definition of embodiment. I was just reading this study from Harvard, which is, they've done this like 80-year study out of Harvard, longitudinal study of human flourishing. And the basic conclusion is the quality of your relationships is the quality of your happiness, right? Like, that's the basic conclusion of 80 years of one of the best studies in the world. And this is classic wisdom. I mean, in traditional communities, this doesn't need to be said. This is just there. So I think we're sort of reinventing the wheel in kind of a modern, postmodern context. And people are doing the best they can. And sometimes, just getting to that athletic yoga class is a lot better than nothing. But without real human relationships, and we need to figure out what that looks like, because the sort of economic system we're in destroys those. Right, it moves workforces around based on who can get the cheapest salaries, and that like, I don't live where my parents lived, right? Like, my sister, who I'd be great to babysit her niece and nephew, she lives on the other side of the country because of work, right? So there's this kind of economic kind of issues there, I think, as well, in terms of the bigger system, and we don't value it. I mean, let me ask you this: like, what is America's God?
Money.
Okay, yeah, money. And I'd say maybe secondary, that's probably the primary one. Secondarily, probably fame. If you ask the kids, they want to be YouTubers, they want to be famous, right?
Right.
So I go, okay, status, fame, money, it's materialism. That's all materialism. It's just different types of materialism. So if we make that our God, we become nihilistic. It is a definition of nihilism. We believe in nothing. If we become nihilistic, we become addicted to things because we try and seek pleasure as a substitute for meaning. And we become narcissistic because we put ourselves at the center of the universe. And none of that ends well. I think what we're seeing now is like the end game. We're seeing, as I said,
Yeah.
Nietzsche identified this. This isn't a new problem, but we're seeing the end game where the sort of, I call it the psychological tipping point. Others have called it the psychological Black Death. Like people in business like 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I started, it was like, do some meditation, that'll be fine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's not going to cut it anymore. I mean, yeah, great. Do your app, do your meditation 10 minutes a day as a help. But we live in a fundamentally unsustainable system, and it's coming down around our ears. You know, over 50% of young American women have a mental health problem. Like
Yes.
more than half. It used to be 1 in 4 when I was young. It's like, really, that's like, what's that, doubled? So it's a huge number. The addiction crisis, like when I was in Austin, I just saw like opiate addicts everywhere. Right. And even the weed people are smoking is pretty tough. And the kids are addicted to computer games they're playing 3 hours a day while vaping, while jacking off to porn. None of this is sustainable. It's just like, I know this is a little bit harsh, black pill. I try and have a sense of humor around things because we are also living in the best time to be alive.
Right.
Right. Like we can do the podcast. You know, I can use ChatGPT to search out the latest philosophy. I can have students from around the world. You know, I'm flying to Berlin tomorrow. You know, we're living an amazing, like my granddad was an illiterate peasant Irish fisherman.
Yeah.
Who then fought on D-Day and almost got killed. Right. And then it's like, now I'm like complaining that my cappuccino is not decaf, you know?
Right.
So, we should see the absurdity of this. It's this, you know, Nietzsche kind of took things a bit seriously. I think we should also look at the absurdists and sort of say, look, let's also laugh at the ridiculousness of this situation.
Absolutely. I have a book on my bookshelf, and it's basically how to laugh at your existential crisis. And it was an author here in Austin who wrote it, and it's very similar to a lot of the memes that you post, like these mental health memes and these spiritual
we're
memes.
quite playful about it.
Yeah, I mean, but we have to laugh. Like, what else are you going to do if you can't laugh at yourself? Then
well, you could become German or Californian. You know, in either case, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. So yeah, I mean, I actually teach my coaches how to use humor as a tool of regulation, as a way to get into depth, as a way to get out of a coaching session, as a way to distance subject from object, to see your patterns just as things to laugh at. Like there's a whole coaching system I built around this that works with the embodiment coaching. But yeah, like humor, like is, and if you meet any spiritual master, they're like Yoda. They're constantly cracking jokes. Like Yoda's based on a Zen teacher. It's like they're constantly cracking jokes.
Yes, absolutely. I did a Vipassana 2 years ago. I don't know if you've ever sat in one of those. Yeah.
Similar things. Yeah.
And, you know, you sit through the discourse every evening, and the I think Goyonka, I'm probably pronouncing that very incorrectly, but anyways, he, you know, I remember just being like, I'm listening to story time from grandpa, and I was chuckling. Every night I was chuckling, you know, I was just like, this is great. And because of that, it makes it very relatable and you can absorb it better. It still was very, very difficult, but very enlightening as well. I learned a lot through that. And, you know, it was very much an embodiment practice for 10 days of learning.
Yes, tough practice. I'd recommend beginners do something a bit more chill than the 10-day Vipassana, but it's more of an intermediate level, I'd say, practice. But for beginners, particularly with the modern mind, I mean, my mind's like a box. It's like most people's mind's a box of frogs. You know, it's absolutely all over the place. So I'd say like 3 days semi-silent retreat would be a good start, or you know, even just a quick bit of guided meditation on an app, or breath work's very popular because breath work, you know, is something you can follow. I'm doing a breath work sequence in the mornings at the moment. Yeah, Wim Hof has been very popular as a result of that. He's an embodiment teacher. So, you know, different people find different practices, but yeah, if you do get the chance, you know, to do a retreat in silence, and you might go a bit crazy before you go sane, would be my only slight caution there.
Yes, I definitely had my mind unravel a couple times, and then it wove itself back together, but it was very much an unraveling process. So it's certainly interesting to go through. Have you ever done a darkness retreat?
Darkness. Well, I mean, I live in England, so I mean, it's pretty much. No, I haven't done a full one. My colleague did one actually. It sounded pretty interesting. I mean, there's always these extreme practices, but I'm more a sort of embodiment in daily life guy these days. You know, the sort of householder path they call it. Right? I've lived in monasteries and lived in Aikido dojos, and it's great if you're in your 20s, but if you've got a business and a wife or maybe kids, I think it's, you know, we need something that's more integrative.
Yes. And I like that term, the householder path. And that was actually during Vipassana why I connected so much to the discourse every evening because he actually used to be a householder, right? Not just this monk that was sitting in a mountain doing what he was doing. And so I also, this is why I shy away from the word retreat, or, these things that business people often go and do is like, oh, I need to get away. I need to go and turn off. Yes, we do need to do those things. But if you're constantly bouncing from the extremes, you don't ever get to regulate and be centered. So
yeah. And the thing that retreats are bad at is integration. So, or even a mini example, someone goes to a yoga class, they really relax, they feel great, they're in Shavasana at the end, then they jump up and get their phone out.
Yeah.
And immediately their mind stays back to where they were an hour and a half ago. And I just think, what's the point? I noticed that when I went to my first Buddhist retreat. I've done monastic stays for a month and stuff. And it's great if you want to go really deep. But states don't last. And how do we, when I'm training coaches, the key thing is little and often in their life. We give them 20 minutes at the beginning of the day, 5 minutes throughout the day, and 10, 20 minutes at the end of the day. And for busy people, that's plenty. Maybe an hour deepening once a week. If people can get to one of my retreats for 2 days or 3 days, maybe 5 days, great. But a lot can't. And I realized that during COVID, actually, we used to work only in person. And then I realized now I have students in like Vietnam and very disabled students and students with 5 kids and single mums. And it's like they can only do it because it's online. And the beauty of that is it's very integrative because they're doing the practice in their house, right? So I used to think, oh, for embodiment, we can't do online. And then I started experimenting. We did this big summit a few years back, which was nearly killed me. I had 1,000 teachers at this summit. 500,000 people came. I think it was the record. Kamala tried to break it again recently, but I think I still beat her. And after that, I was like, oh shit, you can do loads online that I didn't think was possible before. So it surprised me as an embodiment teacher how much you can do and the integration that happens.
Do you still do anything you're going to Berlin, so you do things in person, but largely is it a mix, 50-50? What would you say?
70-30. Like our main business is online work. That's we have like 200 students a year on that. I do in person because it's fun. And we do some nature retreats, which obviously you can't do online. Like the Slovenian mountains, kind of looks like Switzerland. If people want a mental image, it's next to Switzerland. That's just gorgeous. And there's a level of kind of letting go and tuning out and turning your phone off that that's worth doing. I'm doing one by Lake Bled this year, which is a beautiful, just Google it, BLED, Lake Bled. It's nicer than it sounds. It's a beautiful blue aquamarine lake, and we do the whole training. We swim in the lake, walk in the woods, and it's just gorgeous. So there's no replacing that. So I still do that more for fun, but in terms of training coaches and making money, it's all the online stuff.
All the online stuff, yeah. And I do agree with you that that integration piece is so missing, and not even just in retreats or in these things that we go away and do, but in a lot of training in general. You have these leadership trainers coming in, you have, whatever type of training it is that you're doing, it's often very focused on a certain area and it's these extreme examples, but it often fails to deliver something that people can practically walk away with, which is why very often people don't see results after some of these big training that they invest in.
This comes back to the misunderstanding of what learning is that I mentioned before. So most business people, because they're Western educated, they think you learning about things is enough, unless they're sports people. So sports people, like musicians, get that practice is what leads to permanent, right? Yeah. So sports people practice 90% of the time and perform 10% of the time or less. Business people think they're going to just practice or perform all the time with no practice, which is crazy. Again, it's just they've misunderstood that what they're doing is skills. Like management is the skill, leadership is a skill. Yeah. Self-regulation, all the sub skills of emotional intelligence or whatever, they're skills. They need practice. So the key thing is not to read a book on it. One of my teachers used to call books shelf help because they stay on the shelf and don't help. Right?
Yes.
As Wendy Palmer, she's great. And and I feel like that's often the missing piece and across the West, but I think business people are actually particularly prone to it because the busyness of their life, and often they're very cognitively smart people, and that's worked quite well for them up to a point.
Correct. So once they get to that point where the cognitive smarts is leveling off, what do they need?
Divorce, heart attack, burnout, they're the big ones. There's more Yeah, I mean, again, it's start gently. I try and put things in a frame that people can understand. You can use neuroscience to explain various things, for example. That can be helpful. Various evidence bases out there, mindfulness evidence base, etc. Use language that people understand that isn't too weird. I don't use the yoga voice. I dress like a normal guy. I got like, this is my jacket. If this was a kind of, I'd probably put my jacket on over there. It's like just normal stuff. And then just basic practices, things like a centering practice. I walk in and say, who's got some stress in their life? Everyone puts their hands up. Okay, who'd like a bit less stress? All right, give me 2 minutes of your life. Let's try something. All right, put your feet on the ground, relax your belly, soften your jaw, say, think of someone who makes you smile. Okay, now let's come back to that business problem with a little bit more sort of neocortical creativity and less of a limbic hijack. And like people quickly see results with that. They're like, wow, I'm having better ideas. My relationships with my team are better. I'm less stressed. I'm eating less junk food, like very quickly. And then you've just got to put in a practice routine. So that's where you get, little thing, the 5 times a day alarm that goes off on their iPhone and things like that. It's really, really practical.
Yeah. And very simple. It doesn't require you to buy an app or have a device or anything like that.
Yeah, when we build it into their lives, right? Like I was working with a HR manager in Holland and he already rode horses once a week. So that was easy. We just built it into that. Other people, it's like they do running and then we add little routines to their running, Other people, they just get into the macho cold showers and that's their practice, So it's different people need different things. And the art of embodied coaching is kind of seeing what people might need, what they're going to do. I like to do a few sessions with people for 4 lots of 30 minutes is normally enough, just so I can go, okay, get to know them, give them something to do, check back in. Is it working? If not, change it to something else. By session 3 or 4, they're having results and it's totally self-sustaining.
That's awesome. And that's what you want, right? We want people to be able to do this on their own. It's about self-regulation and being able to get into that state without needing the aid of something external. And yet most people are going for the external solution constantly.
That's our culture, right? Our culture says you fix the inside by the outside. And, I'm 19 years sober and that's the definition of addiction, by the way. So it's, our culture sees, I've got an internal problem. I look for an external solution. I mean, in a way, that's the beauty of Western civilization. That's why we went to the moon. That's why we invented all this cool stuff, because we're constantly, the Asian way is to fix the inside. Yeah. And both are helpful, it's like, I've Indian culture, for example, is very beautiful in one way, but they didn't invent a bunch of other stuff, So right. It's, both are potential ways to benefit humanity. But yeah, sometimes people need a guided meditation or an app or something. It's fine. But ultimately, what they can carry with them anywhere is what best serves them.
Yes. Now, when we look at the inside versus the outside, how would you guide people to make that switch and to have a better balance between the two? Because as you said, both have benefits. To use the Eastern Western example, let's look at medicine, right? If I'm having a heart attack, I'm not going to go to the Chinese medicine doctor and get a bunch of herbs. I'm going to go to the ER, right? Yeah. But if I want to prevent that heart attack, then I'm going to look at diet and exercise and all these other things. So when it comes to this type of work, movement is a big embodiment practice. So how would you guide someone who's been so focused on external to see the value in the internal and also have a better ratio on where their focus is going?
Yeah, I think the world's waking up to it. As we said earlier, things have got easier, right? So I don't have to hard sell it. I don't think at this point people get that modernity has got some serious problems.
Yeah.
They've got a friend who does yoga and looks fantastic, or a friend that does martial arts and seems pretty chill, so they've often, like I would just point them to those role models and examples. I say, try things. Try something, see if it works for you. Don't believe me. You might start someone off with a stillness practice, a movement practice, and a nature practice. 10 minutes a day walking in the park at lunch, 10 minutes a day sitting meditation, a little bit of yoga once a week. All right. So you could start someone off with that. Often I say follow enjoyment. So, there's the German way and the Italian way, right? The German way is to look at the most efficient way of doing embodiment in your life. But actually, the Italian way is just to go, well, what's fun? What have you always wanted to do? Have you wanted to be a ninja? Did you want to learn to dance with your wife? I mean, like, what do you want to do, man? And usually people, I've always wanted to box. You know, my dad used to box, or, you know, my wife's always trying to get me to go to salsa dances. Maybe I should go with her, you know, like, all the kids are always trying to get me to go do karate with them, or whatever it is. Right. So yeah, where's the joy is a sort of simple starting point. I mean, the body's just a huge source of pleasure. This isn't, self-care can become this whole like one more chore to do, right? Or it can be very shallow, like you have to have a bubble bath once a week. And it's like, well, actually, you know, you might need to go a bit deeper and look at your boundaries first, or look at your, you know, weird self-harming patterns around filling your diary so intensely. Yeah, you know, there's deeper issues for some people, trauma issues, etc. But I think we can also just look at like embodiment, and this is a huge opportunity. Like, my mum had to drive 50 miles to the nearest yoga class. I got 10 yoga classes within walking distance, and another 100 online. Right, you know, another 1,000 on YouTube. So it's like, it's a huge opportunity, and there's a lot of joy in it. Like, most people go to yoga and they just feel good. You know, it's not, you don't have to sell it to them.
Absolutely. There was a keynote speaker I saw at a conference last year, and he talked about having a pink Cadillac. And when he was at this point in his life when everything was just, he had the Instagram perfect life, right? But everything was very dark. And he came across this pink Cadillac, and for some reason it filled him with a ridiculous amount of joy. And whenever he drove it, other people would come and comment on it or talk about it and just light up. And so he started thinking about that as a concept. And now that's what he talks about, right? Like, what's your pink Cadillac? What's that thing that just fills you with this really good feeling? Because doing more of that is only going to benefit you.
Yeah, that's normally stage one. Stage two is if people have already done something. So someone like yourself, someone that's a bit more experienced, some of the people coming to coach training for me, they're not total newbies, especially these days. Quite common, even in, like, you know, finance sector in London and stuff, people have done something. So then the question becomes, what embodiment do you want to build? So we can be more or less embodied, like, i.e. more aware of our body more deeply more of the time, but we can also have a different embodiment, right? This is the common sense use of the word. So if you do 10 years of salsa dancing versus 10 years of karate, you will be different. So one of the things I'll say to people, if they've done 10 years of something, is, well, if is there any skill sets you're not building? Like, yoga might be great for self-awareness and self-regulation, but it's not so good for the sort of social side of things, empathy and leadership. And, you know, you might need to do acro yoga or some kind of partner yoga, right? So you might need to move to tango or aikido. So yeah, those who are sort of more experienced, level one is just do what the hell you want, find something fun, fall in love with it. Level two is like, okay, you've got very good at one thing, but maybe neurotically so. Let's see if we can't build some skills on the other side of things, like self-regulation versus self-expression, for example.
And so if yoga is self-regulation, then self-expression might be more of like dance or art, or
like improv, comedy, dance stuff, more, you know, more out there things.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because a lot of people, again, because of society, because what they were trained, what they were taught in school, that, you know, when you learn about things and you're really smart and, you know, you have this high intelligence, high IQ. And so we think we're left-brained. We think that we're, you know, logical and linear. When, I mean, I truly believe that all humans are creative and we all have our different things. And then we squash them out as we are growing up because a parent or a teacher or somebody said something to us, told us that that was stupid or not worthwhile, or you won't make money with that. And that's not the point. Like, it doesn't have to make money. It can just bring you joy. But recently, in like the last 5-6 years, I've been diving back into my creativity, and I did some little, I don't know, visual thing, little test. And I was like, if you see it walking one way, you're left brain. And if you see it walking the other way, you're right brain. And for me, it was the right brain. And I was like, interesting. Because for like most of my life, I would have said that I was very much a left brain person. But as I call it the revealing, you know, I'm like chipping away at all the stuff I put in place to protect myself. Then as I get back to my true self, then all of these other skills are starting to come back online. And I'm having memories of it being a child and being really creative with something, or, you know, loving art class. And having these interests and abilities, but then for many, many years, just completely ignored them or, you know, poo-pooed them because I thought that they weren't worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, our culture really says that we have to monetize everything, right?
Yeah.
And I know I'm a run a business. That's okay. I'd say that spiritually, we all have kind of a caste. Okay, so I don't believe obviously in a rigid caste system like in India 200 years ago or something, right? But
Yeah.
I'm not merchant caste. Now I do business because that's part of the world we live in. It's okay, challenges me nicely. But I'm not like my friend Alex, who was born to do that. Like he's a
Yeah.
great merchant. He's good at it. He's generous. He's ethical. Great guy. Great guy. I go to him for business advice. You know, most people aren't that. And I think part of getting older is realizing you have a nature. It's like, what am I here to do? What's my soul's work? And, you know, when I was teaching in Ukraine, I was like, I am so suited to this. I was like, this is brilliant. This is just what I should be doing. You know, when I do my coaching workshops, it's like I was born to teach. I met someone at a party the other day. I said, he was a poker player. So he was pretty good character reading. And I said, what do you do? Poker. We talked about that. It's really interesting. Body language. You know, we had a lot in common. I said, what do you think I do? He said, you're a teacher. He knew because he was good at reading human beings. I said, why? It's like, it just oozes out of every pore in your being that you're a teacher. I was like, well, I'm a third generation teacher with 20,000 hours of experience. Good spot, mate, you know? Yeah. So it's like, that's who I am, you know, on some level. And I just need to celebrate that. It's like, yeah, I can get better at business. It's not an excuse for being a loser brokey. You know, it's like, what's in your soul that way? That's, I think, as you get older, you accept that maybe there's more artist in you than you thought. And not everything has to make money. I have hobbies, you know, I have charities and side projects and just things I do for fun. But yeah, this idea that we're human doings and havings, that we are objects that are there to make money, this materialist paradigm that we can't just be human beings, we're not into being, this to me is missing the point. It's dehumanizing. It's dehumanizing, and no one can cope with it, really.
Well, and this is back to your earlier point about, you know, these side projects, these hobbies that you have, that adds meaning to your life. And that is what's allowing you to flourish. That's what allows us to, you know, all of this work, embodiment practice, positive psychology, all of this stuff that you're teaching others. It's not to then say like, you'll never have problems in your life. You're still going to have problems, but you'll be better equipped to deal with them.
Yeah, divorce still sucks, but yeah, there is things I've dealt with, you know. I still struggled to lose weight when I did that last year, you know, stuff that's just normal human stuff. But I mean, the difference is I'm tooled up, right? Like if I look at, say, I don't know, me versus my sister, love her to bits, get on really well, but she had a different career path. And when we were, say, grieving my dad's death, very different because of who I know and the skills I have, very different. In terms of our health, very different. Yeah, now she's got some great skills. Brilliant mum, for example, good at a job, you know, brilliant person. But those body mind skills make a huge difference when the shit hits the fan.
Absolutely. And again, that's that reps that you might feel like is not doing too much, but then when those things occur, you're more resilient and you're more able to handle that.
You have a cold shower every morning and it just sucks and you're like, why am I doing this? And then it's like, then you realize that after a while, like, oh, that meeting kicked off and someone disagreed with me and I was able to control my breath and keep my center and come across as more grounded and charismatic or whatever it was. Like, oh, the reps have added up. Great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it just, you know, it's like you've done something hard for the day. You've done a cold shower. You've lifted
do it in the morning. Yeah. I mean, eat a live frog first thing in the morning. The rest of your day will be easy. Yeah. I mean, we'll be a little bit careful. There's this sort of tendency like David Goggins and Jocko Willink at the moment to do a lot of very challenging stuff. Yes. I think it suits like young guys and sort of Navy SEAL types, which is some of us. It was me when I was in my 20s. I had that macho going home. But I don't think it's good for everyone. I don't think it's good for a lot of women with different nervous systems, older people, even like myself in middle age. Yeah. I mean, you can do too much intensity. And I, for example, I alternate cold dowsing with breath holding on different mornings, just because I found that doing all difficult things was too much. And we do need to sort of kick back and be a bit more Mediterranean sometimes, you know, like I've spent time in the Med and you learn a lot there. Those guys know how to live.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why it's a blue zone.
Yeah, they live forever. It's like these old Italian guys, they're drinking ouzo or whatever, smoking, eating whatever, and they're living till they're 90.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, I think back to when we met and when I was living in Hong Kong, but just a few years prior to that, you know, I was competing in CrossFit and I was on a plane 4 to 5 times a week. And I was, you know, working insane hours and doing my MBA part-time. You know, it was just like intensity. And I used to wonder why I didn't sleep. Meanwhile, I was exhausted and jacking myself up with like 9 Nespressos a day just to keep going. Like,
Yeah,
no wonder.
we say everyone's dead now, distracted, exhausted, anxious, and depressed. And the exhausted comes from pushing too hard for too long. There's only so long we live in a yang culture, right? And the hippies go too far the other way. They're sometimes too yin, right? Yeah, it's like, the East Coast, West Coast thing, right? Like I've always liked Austin in the Midwest because it's a balance between the pushing and the driving and the not doing. And yeah, we need both. Like we absolutely need both. So too much pushing and driving, people just collapse eventually. And I sometimes say to business people, I say, do you want to wait till you have a heart attack because you're heading that way? Do you want to wait till you have a divorce because you're heading that way? Do you want to wait till you burn out and you can't work for a year and you have to take a year out? Or do you want to look at it now?
Yeah. And it's a lot of people think it won't happen to them. I mean, I thought it wouldn't happen to me.
We're all Superman, right? We're all invincible.
And it's still, I had a doctor actually tell me, because I went and did a hormone panel to check what was going on, because I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't recovering, just some things were a little bit wonky, and I was competing, so it was affecting my performance. So I wanted to know why. And the results came back, and he sat me down. I remember he was very serious, and he's like, if you do not slow down, you will, not might, you will have a heart problem or an autoimmune disease within 2 years. And I was like, wow. I'm 29. Like, no, that doesn't happen to people like me. So I kind of was like, yeah, okay, I'll sleep more or whatever. Sure enough, 6 months later, I started to get nerve pain over the whole right side of my body. My sleep got worse. I started to have digestive issues, just like it kept going and going.
Yeah,
and the pain started to impact my work. But so many people wait until it's too late, until they have the thing occur. And sometimes that's the pill, that sometimes that's the medicine we need. But we can also take preventative action and look and see, what's happening around us and go, I don't want that to be my future. So what can I do about it now?
Nice. Yeah. And often we do leave it a bit too late. That is human nature. We're all human. There's no point kicking ourselves for that, right? We learn when we learn.
Well, and compassion is a big part of the embodiment journey. And like what you said before, our bodies are not just this vehicle to do something for us. But yet so many people punish themselves, right? Like, oh, I didn't run as fast as yesterday, or
where it just becomes another way to be wrong. Right.
Yeah.
Like I didn't do enough yoga. I didn't meditate this morning. I slept in. So that's not helpful either.
And where do you think this whole making ourselves wrong came from? You said something before, but where do you think that is derived from?
Well, I mean, every society does need a healthy sense of good and bad, good and evil, right and wrong. And I think in postmodernity, we've lost what that is. Like I think there's such a thing as healthy shame, for example, right? So it's like, other cultures have traditionally had that, but we don't really. It's like, I'll do what I want. It's like, it's very teenage, kind of modern culture. It's like, I'll do what I want to do. No one tells me what to do. And I think as a result of that, say again?
We're stuck in adolescence.
Yeah, stuck in adolescence for sure. And I think as a result of that, we don't have any clear standards or boundaries. If you don't give kids those things, they go a bit nuts. And we're trying to self-police as a result, Yeah. We're trying to sort of make ourselves perfect in a way without knowing where the boundaries are around that, without knowing what the limits are. So yeah, I'd say it's not. Some people say, it's over boundary, it's traditional religion or whatever. I say it's the opposite. I say it's under boundary. I think it's the fact that we don't know what virtue is today. We haven't, like, if you ask the average, let's say you're Socrates, you stop the average American in the street, like Socrates would in Athens, and say, what is virtue? Like, how do you build virtue? People wouldn't necessarily have an answer to that. No. And there's this very sort of postmodern, well, there's no right and wrong, and who says what's good and bad? I mean, that is an issue with a multicultural society, is that a culture is a value set. So when you have that creates confusion as to what's right and wrong. And that can lead to either retreat to fundamentalism, which you'll also see in the States, less in Europe, actually, or it can lead to this sort of, we can call that the traditionalist cage from the modern desert, or you can drown in the postmodern swamp in Portland. And those things don't end well.
No, they do not. Now, some schools are teaching this, there is there's more access to information than ever. And yet it is really a byproduct of where you live and what you're surrounded by and what you get fed, if what the algorithm is showing you. And so it really is about taking accountability and responsibility for your own education, your own path forward, right? Making those decisions for yourself and having your own design rather than defaulting to whatever is just fed to you.
Yeah, what's fed to you is poison for profit and control. It is a conspiracy. I mean, Facebook, for example, just to give one example, have been very clear about their algorithm and why it exists. It's to keep you agitated so they can sell you more stuff. It's not. This isn't the secret. Like they admit it.
Right.
I keep picking on them, but this could be picking on all sorts of other things. Facebook are going to sue us. Try it. So no. So what was the question? Take responsibility. Yes. So it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Right. So you can say, hey, I'm in it. But then, if you say, it's the system, this is the sort of leftist point of view, you just go into victim consciousness, which is not helpful. Like the first thing they teach you in sobriety is to take responsibility. Yeah. It's like first surrender, then responsibility. Second, same when I work with young people, it's like, no, you've got to show up on time, take responsibility, no excuses. Like that's business leadership 101 when I teach. It's like everyone comes into a meeting in business, I'm sorry, there was traffic. It's like, you live in LA. Did you not predict that?
Right.
So who would have thought? Had a guy that came into a workshop.
Wow, what a surprise!
Yeah, woo! I had a guy came into a workshop in Moscow years ago. And I was working for one of the big gas companies there, and he said, "I'm sorry, I'm late. There was snow." And I was like, "Mate, it's January in Moscow. Are you Napoleon? Like, what did you expect?"
Yeah.
So it's like there's responsibility is number one. Then we can look at how we can change, our own embodiment, our practices, our own life, our own community. Start there, right? Like before you try and change the world, start there. So there'd be we've talked about a lot of practical starting places, and there's so much good stuff in person, online. People are really lucky to have what we have today.
Absolutely. Well, and by changing and working and evolving yourself, that has a ripple effect because the people around you are impacted because now your steps to the dance are different. They're going to respond differently, and your children are watching, and we often don't know who is watching and how much has had an impact on them. I sometimes will get a message from someone and I might have had like a throwaway line in a podcast or a random story that I shared with a thought or just something that I did and shared. And that then led them down a path of thought or down a like, well, maybe I'll give that a try. And most often we don't know, but it's sometimes, so what I'm trying to get at with that is if that has happened to you, go reach out and tell that person that had an impact. I think that's a very important thing we should all be doing.
The main way we teach is through example.
Yeah.
Like kids, I've worked with like 50,000 kids and they always copy what you do, not what you say. They copy who you are effectively, right?
Yes.
Like if I think of the impact mentors had on me, it was who they are. It wasn't what they said. I think, there's the individual ripple effect. That's true. I think we can also think a bit more collectively than that as well. Elon Musk's robot army is coming to destroy us. So, we probably should bomb his HQ at some point. Just going to incite a little bit of terrorism on your podcast. It's a joke. Okay. If anyone's listening to a joke, don't laugh.
He's British. Give him some slack.
Yeah. So I think we should just think about this individual solution kind of side of things, because that's part of kind of the conspiracy is to say like, oh, this is all on you. The fact that we're destroying your ecosystem, destroying your mind, putting you in this psychological cage of insanity and ridiculous ecological and economic conditions. But do some yoga, bitch. It's not really okay, right? Like I think there's a drug dealer in my house. I can learn self-control, but I might want to kick the drug dealer out of my house. So this is it's a metaphor. There's not literally, if my mum's listening, there's not literally a drug dealer in my house.
She's calling you right now. She's like, Mark.
You gotta have a sense of humor. You gotta have a sense of humor about this stuff.
Absolutely. And so for anyone who's not already following Mark on Instagram, the best memes about any of this stuff that you'll ever find are on there. I'm always laughing when I see
the best memes.
Yes. Yeah. Like honestly, you should maybe launch a meme school for people. Do you teach that to your embodiment coaches as well?
I teach them humor, but not specifically memeing. But,
well, they can be creative in how they express that.
That's true. Definitely.
Speaking of this type of training, I believe you have a course coming up next month. Is that right?
Yes, anyone who wants to train with us, we have the Certificate of Embodiment Coaching, 6 months, proper training in all this stuff. We've done it for many, many years. It's organized by Alina, who's a German, so it's very well put together and organized, and taught by myself and my colleagues. So if you want to learn practical tools for coaching, go to embodimentunlimited.com and look for CEK, C-E-K, the Certificate of Embodiment Coaching. If you're too cheap to buy a course, I have a book out. For many books actually, but that one is good for coaches working with the body and training and coaching. YouTube, podcast. I don't know what else. Send a raven. It's all good.
I'm gonna send a carrier pigeon over with some notes, and we can communicate that way. Although, according to a recent conspiracy that I heard, pigeons are not real; they're just surveillance drones.
No, pigeons are very sad because pigeons used to give messages between people, and what you see in all the urban pigeons of Europe is all the abandoned pigeons who were once we invented telegrams. We abandoned the poor pigeons, and that's why they're quite friendly around people because they were bred to love people. It's very sad. This is a pigeon tragedy.
So now they don't have meaning.
So the pigeons are having a meaning crisis. That's
if you remember nothing else from this podcast, remember that the pigeons are having a meaning
please
crisis.
That's the only important thing I said.
All right, Mark, what is your superpower?
Teaching. Simple one. I'm good at teaching. You know, I don't think I'm good at much, but I'm good at that. More generally, I'd say more specifically teaching with a mixture of pragmatism and humor. That is my sort of particular brand of things.
Beautiful. I love that. And I love asking this question because a lot of people, you know, I knew you would have an answer very quickly, but a lot of people don't often know how to answer this because
I taught a course called Trauma Superpowers and how our superpowers often come from our biggest wounds. So, you know, I just finished this book for young men and eventually I almost cried when I finished it because I realized I'm writing the book I needed as a drug-addled, depressed 16-year-old. Right, like the Feral Philosophy YouTube is the YouTube for young men, and it's all about weightlifting, but it's really about mental health and philosophy. And it's like, oh shit, that came from my trauma. But yeah, I've taught life purpose, so if I didn't know what mine was, I'd be a bit silly.
Absolutely, I would have had to rethink airing this podcast. Who is on your personal board of directors?
Yeah, I thought about this. A few answers to this. So there's sort of, you know, we could go like Jesus, Buddha, and Genghis Khan. You know, that would be the spiritual level, those three. On my mentors, so Paul Linden is a living mentor that I give a lot of credit to. And then I have this online group of friends. We call it the Men's Secret Cabal and the CABAL. And those guys, I can ask like any business question, but also like, you know, wife question, spiritual question, health question. I'm doing a thing on weight loss for the group soon. So that's a group of just really high quality men. And we have private conversations. The best conversations don't happen on social media. They happen privately in closed groups. So yeah, that group for me very practically is, you know, beyond the sort of spiritual level of mentors alive and dead, it would be that group.
Amazing. Now, for a lot of men out there, they may not have a men's group or a place where they can go and have this. Where would they be able to find out more about the group that you're in? What is your recommendation there?
They can't. It's invite only.
Okay.
If they get on my podcast, I might sort of interview them and give them an invite because there's a very specific and quite high criteria for it as a bar to entry. But in terms of forming their own groups, I'd say men tend to bond around activities. So like I'll give you an example. Like some single mums started saying, "Hey, can you have a coffee with my son and help him out? He needs a mentor." And I was like, "I'm not gonna have a coffee with him. That would just be weird. But I will take him to the gym." Yeah. Right. Or if, you know, maybe I could say, I'll help you out, show you how to fix a car or whatever. Right. So men tend to bond around shared activities of doing things. So it's like, let's go kill that antelope together. Yeah. Yes, that's how men bond. So that's what I'd say for the guys is find an activity. You know, my men's group is based around marketing. So people come for the money, but stay for the love. And yeah, you need an activity that you enjoy to bond around, I would say.
Great. Now, my last question is, how do you best serve or represent humanity? And it's asked from the context that another intelligent life form has come to Earth.
And aliens come down.
Aliens come down from one of those drones, and you are the first human that they interact with. So what do they learn about humanity because they get to meet you first?
Well, let's imagine the alien is a sort of AI, disembodied kind of cognitive intelligence, you know, in a machine. I'd explain what a body was and how it was to live as a body, you know, that what it was to be embodied and how that impacted us and how it affects our moods and perception and even how we think and what it was like to be in these juicy, meaty, spiritual, beautiful, fleshy things, as opposed to simply being a computer intelligence, which for the sake of this story, the alien is.
Amazing. Well, and you know, that would be useful, hopefully, for them to understand why they shouldn't just, you know, come and damage all
upload us to the cloud with some human being. I mean, we've already had an alien invasion, right? I mean, we're already the world is already run by demons and psychopaths. The world is not run for human beings. That's clear. The aliens have already taken over. The question is, when are we going to start fighting back?
Yes, that's great. Well, I think that's a wonderful way to sign off on the podcast, and hopefully we'll see some more people taking responsibility for how they do fight back and how they get more embodied. So thank you very much, Mark, for being here. If people want to follow you and get in touch, what is the best place for them to do that?
If they're businesses, just message me through the website Embodiment Unlimited. It's mostly designed for coaches, but they can message me through there. And then wherever you can find stuff. So my team is on Instagram, LinkedIn. We've got articles there, books on Amazon, YouTube, not on Tinder anymore. I'm sorry, I'm taking it. Pretty much like everywhere on the internet. But the main one, embodimentunlimited.com.
Beautiful. Mark, thank you so much for being here with me today and kicking off the podcast for 2025.
My pleasure.